All right, then. It is 11 o'clock, so I think we're going to just go ahead and get started. My name is Quentin Russell, and I am the Content Marketing Specialist here at Doc365. And today, as part of our free webinar, we're going to be covering how to configure and manage vendor collaboration in Office 365. So, before we begin, I'm going to just go over briefly what we're going to be talking about today. Let me just configure this real quick. So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over Doc365's history. So who we are, what we do, kind of establish that we know what we're talking about. After that, we're going to talk about what vendor management is so that you can kind of get a good overview and we can have an operational definition going forward. After that, we're going to talk about why vendor management is important. And then finally, we'll move on to how to build a vendor management plan using Office 365. So configuring the sites, different tools and resources you can use, and also we'll be showing you some of the higher level stuff that you could either potentially build yourself with time and effort or purchase from a SharePoint software provider. After that, we'll do a quick question and answer session where what we'll do is if you have any questions, feel free to type them out in the chat. And then I will go through and work through those at the end during the question and answer session. So with that said, who are we? So we're Doc365. We're a company located in Jacksonville, Florida. We have over 17 years of experience working with SharePoint to deliver exceptional productivity solutions. We do work with tools like internet portals, contract management systems, vendor management systems, CRM solutions, and more. If you'd be interested in using any one of those or learning more about any of those, feel free to sign up for a free demo. You can either do so on our website or by reaching out to us through email. So with that said, let's jump into the actual webinar proper. So what is vendor management? Well, vendor management is the term that describes the processes organizations use to manage their suppliers and vendors. This includes activities such as selecting vendors, negotiating contracts, controlling costs, reducing vendor-related risks, and ensuring service delivery. Basically, it's making sure that when you pay someone money to do something, they're delivering on it, you're delivering on your end, and no one's breaking up the process and causing issues that could cause you to have your bottom line become negatively impacted. With that said, there are 4 major steps to vendor management. These are very broad, high-level macro overview steps. So, you can get more granular with this, and there are resources out there that do go more in depth on these steps and break them down further. These are just the 4 major ones. So the first one is the establishment of business goals. So essentially, this is you defining why you're looking for a vendor in the first place. So once you've selected your goals, it's a lot easier to select and manage vendors when you have clearly defined performance parameters to compare and contrast. That way you can say, okay, we've gone to vendor X and we really need them to do Y. However, if you don't know what your goals are, if you don't know what you're trying to do, well, then you don't know how to measure Y. So you can't accurately determine whether vendor X is actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. A good example of this is if you're using a contract management system, for example. If your goal is to speed up the process and take the actual lifetime of a contract management process from, 6 months to 3 months, you'll be able to accurately track that when it comes to actually selecting the vendor and then implementing it. So during that time, you can track to see whether or not you're actually reducing the time it takes to conduct the contract management lifecycle. And if it doesn't, well, then you know that that's not the vendor that you're looking for and it's time to go somewhere else. So once you've established your business goals, it's time to select the best vendors. So essentially, this is just the process of finding vendors that matches your company's goals and needs. So this is going to include going over a vendor's strengths, their weaknesses, negotiating services, saying, we don't need X, so can we actually pay less for this and just get Y? That sort of thing. Basically, having the right vendor can serve as almost like a force multiplier for your organization. So if you are getting the right materials, if you're getting the right service, and if you're getting it faster and smoother with one vendor than with another, then that's going to translate into your organization. It's going to smooth things out, allow things to move faster, and allow you to do more with what you're buying, and allow you to be more efficient with your money. After that, it's managing suppliers. So you will need to consistently monitor vendor performance and output on a daily basis. So this includes ensuring that contract terms are met, approving and disapproving changes to the contract or service, providing feedback, and developing relationships. This is anything as simple as just sending a, hey, how's it going? We just wanted to check in to make sure everything's good, make sure there aren't any service interruptions that we can expect on the horizon. This is not always something that you can do. There are certain vendors that you go to where that's not exactly feasible. Like if you're using Office 365 and SharePoint, you're not going to be able to call up your local, Office 365 Microsoft sales rep and be like, hey, how's it going? Because they're so massive. But if you're working with local suppliers, local vendors, especially if you're working with specialty materials, building out your supply chains with specialty companies, that's a place where you're developing those relationships, talking to people, checking in, making sure everything's fine, and just building up a rapport with them over the course of several years and your service relationship with them. And then finally, the final big major step is meeting goals. So essentially, this is using the materials, tools, and services provided by your vendors to meet performance objectives to ensure profitability. That's pretty self-explanatory. It's basically taking what you're buying and using it to meet the goals that you defined at the onset of the vendor management process. That's pretty simple. There doesn't really need to be much more talked about with that. So moving on, why is vendor management important? Well, there's 5 major reasons that vendor management is important. The first is that it can help you mitigate risks. And then the next is that it can optimize performance, reduce costs, helps you build loyal relationships with your vendors, and it increases onboarding speed. So let's take a look at each one of these kind of more in depth and go over how vendor management does these. So first off, with mitigating risks. Essentially with vendor management, you're going out of your way to increase vendor visibility. So this can help you avoid unforeseen cost implications or regulatory compliance issues. So you can see them on the horizon, track them, make sure nothing happens with those, and potentially take steps to mitigate them. So for instance, like take recently the Suez Canal. There was that stoppage that happened. That was unforeseen. There really wasn't any way that people could know that that was going to happen. But in incidents like that, where there is that interruption and there's no real way around it, if you are on top of that, if you know it's happening as it's happening, then you can take steps to mitigate it. And especially if, materials that are coming your way are necessary for a project or something that's due within the next week or two, well, then, you can immediately go out of your way once you've gotten news of this happening, because not specifically with the Suez Canal, but essentially an interruption in delivery services. You can jump on that, find an alternative way to get those supplies, get those services, and ensure that at least on your end, there are no interruptions in you completing your goals and delivering on your objectives. It also allows you to track suppliers. So vendor management can help you keep track of everything, and it provides you data that you need to identify risks as they come up and mitigate them before they balloon into major issues. Because the longer you ignore something, the more and more it just begins to pile up and become a problem. And that tends to happen with vendors and especially smaller organizations. So they don't keep track of them. They don't notice there's an issue. And then finally, 6-7 months later, something major happens. There's a complete and total breakdown. And you have people left scratching their heads saying, well, why didn't we know? Well, you would have known had you actually just been engaging in vendor management practices. So moving on from that, vendor management can help you optimize performance. So essentially, It allows you to measure the performance of the vendor against the contract that you signed with them to ensure that everyone is meeting your needs. So essentially, you can track ongoing performance to signal challenges before they become problems or identify areas that may need improvement. So for instance, if your vendor isn't actually delivering the 50 units of X that you need so you can do Y, so for instance, they're only delivering 45 or 46, well, then you'll know that. And you'll be able to track if that's something that's happening consistently or if it's only a one-off thing. And once you've noticed this, you've identified this, you can then go to the vendor and communicate with them and say, hey, we're not getting our full shipment. We're not getting everything we paid for. What's going on? And then if there is a major issue, if there is a breakdown in performance, if they're not living up to their side of the contract, then you can get out of that contract. You can break it because they've already violated the terms of it. So you don't have to continue wasting money and time with a vendor who's not adequately delivering what they promised you. And essentially, that's a very specific situation, but there are plenty of other situations where monitoring the performance of your vendor contracts of your ongoing vendor activities can help you to really optimize and save money over time, which, jumping to that, it helps you reduce costs. So essentially, tracking vendor performance allows you to see any hidden costs to either eliminate them or manage them. So essentially, you run into situations where someone bought a membership for something, they got a subscription for some service, they only intended to have it for like a couple months, but then they forgot to cancel it, and suddenly 3 years later, you've been paying, sure, it's only like $300 and something, but that's a lot of money over time that you could have spent somewhere else, especially if you have a ton of other things like this throughout your organization. Also, vendor management allows you to build strong relationships with your suppliers. So the better that your relationship is with your suppliers, the more likely they are to offer you better rates and give you access to discounts and incentives. Again, this isn't a major thing with like larger organizations, Office 365, Microsoft. I don't know why I said the two, but essentially Microsoft isn't going to give you a major discount on Office 365 because you've been using it for 5 years, but Teddy's Lumber Company is probably going to give you a discount over time if you've worked with them for like 10 years. Say you've got a grandfathered in rate because you've worked so well alongside them for so long. And essentially just keeping on track of that, monitoring your costs, making sure you're not spending too much money, making sure that the money that you're actually using all of the services that you're purchasing from your vendors. So for instance, if you want to get the Adobe Suite, but you're really only using it for video editing, and you're not really doing anything else, well, at that point in time, you might want to weigh the costs and benefits of potentially switching over from the entire Adobe Suite to just using Premiere Pro or something like that. So moving on from that, the actual building of loyal relationships. I don't know about you, but good vendors can be difficult to find. And that's why it's important to keep the ones that you do find. Vendor management can help you stay on top of vendor activities and generate goodwill. So essentially, you are listing out obligations, you're tracking everything, you're making sure that you're getting your invoices on time, you're delivering your end of everything without any delays, it's smooth, efficient, there's no real difficulties on the vendor's side of things. And the more you can do that, and the longer you can engage in that kind of activity, the more you can really build up goodwill with them. And the more likely they are to work with you, offer you discounts like we said previously, and just make sure that you aren't getting shafted in some way, shape, or form. Like they're going to go out of their way to deliver extra. If there is some interruption, they'll be more likely to offer you compensation, be more likely to give you, small kickbacks when they can, and just go above and beyond for you when for other organizations, they might just deliver the bare minimum. So yeah. And then the last thing, major benefit, is when you're adding new vendors. So this isn't a concern for a lot of companies, but it can be if you're working with, 50, 60, 70 vendors at a time. Basically, onboarding and setting up vendors is difficult and time consuming. You have to get the right documentation from them. So you have to get, so if you have requirements that you need from them, you send that document over to them. You got to get that back from them. You got to get them to sign the contract. You got to get them to send their due diligence, any other documentation and certification that you need to have for regulatory bodies on your side of things. And so you really don't want to be wasting time on getting everything set up. That's why a smooth vendor management process can help new vendors get set up so you can hit the ground running. So we'll basically try to automate a lot of these things, get things sent out quickly, make sure everyone is on top of it so that everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing. And instead of wasting time bumbling around, running up on deadlines, you're getting things done ahead of time, you're getting things done early, you're sending it out, you're on, and everything is set up smoothly without any interruptions in your business activities. So with that said, we're going to move on to how to build a vendor management plan using Office 365. So essentially there's 4 major steps that you want to take with this. And this is what we're going to, we're going to kind of walk you through this. So the first one is to conduct a business inventory. So with this, you want to take stock of what you currently have, what you're currently spending money on, and then go from there. After that, you'll want to build out the actual plan. So delegating out tasks, deciding who's supposed to be doing what your actual processes are, what documentation you need, getting that set up, which leads us into the third part, which is actually building out your Office 365 sites. And we'll be covering that. We'll go into that. I'll show you an example, several examples of, something basic you can build and then something more advanced that we've built out for our customers. And it's probably something you should be looking at if you are, not as from a sales perspective, but this is something that you should take a look at, probably use as a metric for other vendor management portals. And then finally, actually implementing your plan. So we'll go over some tips that you can use to make sure that you're staying on top of things and not getting left in the lurch with your vendors. So from there, so basically conducting a business inventory. So this includes identifying your assets. So figuring out what you currently have, what you're currently spending money on, how, your income, how much money, what your budget is for actually getting new materials, acquiring new vendors, what you're looking for. And then you want to identify your goals. So basically you want to build these around like your SMART goals, and these should generally align with your overall business goals and objectives. But these are basically SMART goals are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based goals. Basically, they're things that you can achieve within a set period of time, and you can actually measure them, and they're realistic. So basically saying, oh, we want to increase our company's revenue is not a SMART goal. It's very basic. It's not going to get you anywhere. There's nothing to measure there. But if you say, oh, we want to increase our productivity by 15% by driving employee engagement using X and Y tools. Well, that's measurable. You can basically you can identify what tools people are using, so you can track that, and then you can make sure to track the actual correlation between engagement in your organization and the use of that tool, and then you can track the overall productivity and how that's increased over time. That's a SMART goal, and you want to have those when it comes to your vendor management. So it's essentially we want to speed up our vendor onboarding process and take it from a 5-month process to a 4-month process, or take it from a 1-month process to a 2-week process, or, we want to, we need this tool because it says it can do this and increase our productivity by X%. And so we want to keep track of that. And that's a goal that we have. So that way, when you do go to your vendors and you say, hey, we need you to do this for us. This is our goal. This is what we're trying to do. Can you help us? And then once you have that goal, once you've chosen your vendor, you can then take that goal and measure it against the performance of the service or tool that they're providing you. And if it does measure up, if it does stack up, then you know that that's a vendor you want to continue to work with. And then finally, you want to identify your gaps. So essentially, your gaps are what do you have, where are you at, and what are your goals? And then your gaps is just the spaces in between. Identifying your gaps will allow you to basically figure out what vendors you need. So a big one is if you are, what you have right now is a defined contract management process, but it takes forever. So your goal is to speed it up. Then what you would be looking at, so then your gap is time. Your gap is, time spent working on contract management. So when it comes to a vendor, you would go to them and you would say, well, we need something that will speed up the process. We need something that includes automation. We need something that includes, that allows us to potentially skip aspects of the process and allows us to move things along faster. So essentially, all of this is really helpful when it comes to actually figuring out what you need when it comes to actually approaching a vendor and working with them. So moving on from that, not implementing the plan, but let's jump into Office 365 real quick. And I'm going to show you really quick a basic site. So essentially, in Office 365, you can build out multiple types of sites. I recommend using a team site for this, as well. Sites are functionally similar. You can build out anything using any web part, but team sites are more natively built out to help you with these things. So as you can see right here, this is kind of a basic vendor management site. We set up the quick links right here to take people to important documents that they would want to have access to. You can build out the planner web part within here. So you just come in here to edit the page itself. And as you can see, I've added the planner web part. So we'll just add a title right here. And so with that, people can come in here, access this, and instead of having to go specifically to Planner, they can do everything from this site right here. So as you can see, these are the different tasks that people need to do. You can assign these out to people. So as you can see right here, you can customize these tasks, put them out to different people. So essentially, once you've come to, once you've started working through your vendor management process, once you've built out your plan, it's essentially, coming in here and setting that up. So when it comes to actually building out your plan, so there's a ton of different ways you can do that. But one of the best ways is to just build it out in Planner. So saying, okay, these are the steps of the process. So essentially, these are the different buckets. So we have these things in stage one. So in this one, it's vendor. So basically planning, you'd want to set this up as procurement. You'd want to add a bucket for analysis. Then you'd add a bucket for for onboarding. And then you'd add a bucket for management. And then what you would do is you would build out a series of different tasks within here that can either be copied and repeated or just custom tasks based off of what's going on in your, with the actual vendor process. So starting out here with the company inventory, basically building out a Excel spreadsheet. So using either a pre-built template from a website or building your own, depending on what you're trying to do. But essentially coming into here and filling out an inventory of your assets right now. So saying, hey, we have this is what it's called, this is its description, this is how much it's worth, this is how much we have, the value. And then you can customize these columns to be whatever you want them to be. So essentially, hey, when was it bought? Does it have a warranty? Do we want to renew this? How do we feel about this? Information like that. So once you've kind of got that set up and then you maintain that, and you essentially make it someone's task to go in and re-update that every, couple, weeks or months or, every quarter or something, where they essentially just go through and say, okay, this is your responsibility to do this, pull this out, that sort of information. So then from there, you can then build out like a series of different templates and everything. So one thing I really recommend you do is just have a general document area where you keep your different vendor contract templates. So like if your contract templates, your price lists, your registrations, your RFPs, your risk assessments, your scorecards, your vendor change order, and then from there you would just add them into different folders for the different organization. So essentially, if you are, you're buying laptops from Dell. So you basically you build out a folder for that, and you just say, okay, Dell. And then from there, so say you're doing multiple work orders through Dell, you'd create like a folder for laptops, you do a folder for desktops, and then you would contain all the documentation, so the purchasing orders, your contract with Dell, your warranty, your user manual, you'd keep all those in there. So you can keep track of that information. And then from there, you can build out different tasks for people to do. So you can say, hey, you need to re-up this contract. Okay, so this is done on, so this contract is, we need to check this 30, 60 days out. You'd build a task for someone in here to say, okay, with the actual, come here to the actual management. You'd set the due date for the 23rd, which is like 6 days out. You do the person review contract with Dell. I'm not going to assign this to myself because I would 100% forget this, but you'd essentially add that task. And then what you can do is you can then link straight to that. So you can attach the document right there, add checklists. So if there's like a, order that they need to go through and do things, you can set that up here. And then from there, you're just kind of keeping track of everything, because a big part of vendor management is actually just accountability, making sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing, making sure they're actually checking through everything and just tracking what they're supposed to be tracking. So with that said, that's just kind of a basic way to do things. I am going to show you a vendor management system that kind of does it better. I'm not going to lie, because realistically, you can build out a lot of this, but it's going to take time, trial and error to get things set up. And you're not going to have things like automatic workflows. You're not going to have things like auto notifications and approval processes. And also real quick, I'm going to jump into our vendor management solution. So it's actually a cross between our contract management and vendor management solution. However, the two, so you can get the vendor without the contract, but essentially with the vendor management solution, you can keep track of the different parties in your organization. You can see all of this information about them, and you can customize that to track what about your vendors you're trying to track. You can filter everything out right here to specifically find the vendor that you're looking for. So you don't have to scroll through different document folders. You don't have to move everything around. You can just save time, jump in here, search for them right there. So you go into the actual party itself, you can see the relevant information. All of this is, again, customizable for your needs. Any documents that you've sent back and forth with them, any documents associated with them, you can store those here. And that way, instead of having to search through one giant document library, you can get really granular with your search and kind of just search through a walled garden. And then what you can do is you can also see all the different contacts, any contracts you have with them. So you'd be able to add that to the system and track all of those, specifically, not just the individual documentation. You can also build out questionnaires and send them to them with an external B2B vendor portal. So SharePoint's added a new feature that allows you to build out an external site and then share that with other organizations. They don't need to have Office 365. They don't need to be in your Active Directory. Instead, they can just access the information, and it's still secure, still safe, still stored in your Office 365, and they're not able to see anything from the other vendors. I'll kind of take a look at that in a second. But essentially, you can build out these different questionnaires and send them out to them, make them visible. They'll get a notification that they're supposed to complete this, so that instead of having to email everything back and forth, have things get lost in email, it's all right here. And there's no real way that you can lose it. And there's a sort of accountability. There's not a sort of accountability. There's a huge amount of accountability to this. Then you can also build out and add scorecards in here, and we'd also help you build these out, but essentially allow you to rate your vendors, their service, how well they actually perform, and then you can use this to go to your procurement team and say, hey, we didn't like this vendor, find us someone new. Here's why we didn't like them. Here's what, here are the opportunity gaps that we see. Find us a vendor that fills these gaps. And then also you can so here's where you would add users to the portal. As you can see, they go out to different people. And so these people would have access to that external portal. And then you can also send them invoices. So taking a look at that external vendor portal, basically what they would get a link to this, they'd have access to it, and they would jump in here and they would be able to see all the information related to them. So they'd be able to see what tasks you've assigned out to them, who they're, what contracts they have with you, what contacts they have added to this side of things. The vendors can actually update this themselves. So the responsibility of keeping vendor information updated doesn't have to fall on you. And so you can spend less time on that and more time actually doing business. So as you can see, they can update this information. Certain things they don't have the ability to update, but then they can see all of this information, and that way, and they don't have the ability to change it or see things without you giving them the ability to. They can fill out the questionnaire, see their tasks. You can also publish the scorecard out to them so that they can keep track of that and know how they're doing and know whether or not that you're continuing service with them. So that's like a brief overview of our vendor management system. It's not, there's definitely a lot more to it, and I'd love to show it to you in a more in-depth demo. You can sign up for that for free on our website, mydoc365.com. Just go to our vendor management page, sign up for a free demo. There's no obligation. I'd love to go more in-depth and explore how our vendor management system can help you. So once you've kind of got your infrastructure for building your vendor management plan in place, implementing it is actually pretty simple. First of all, you need to be conducting ongoing evaluations. If you're using a vendor management system, if you're using Office 365, that's going to be pretty easy because you're going to be forced to do it. You'll have the tasks built out. They'll be set up so that it just happens naturally over time and you don't have to make a big fuss of it. You don't have to remember it and then suddenly jump in and sort through a mountain of paperwork. And then, another part of it is identifying key vendors. So not just, your normal vendors, but what vendors. So at the end of the day, end of the world happens for your organization and you have to majorly cut down on what you're doing. Who do you need to keep? Who can you cut loose? Make sure to have that prioritization so that when, the worst does potentially happen, you can follow that plan, cut off the superfluous vendors, and continue to work unhindered and potentially recover from it a lot easier than if you were just having to spend a ton of time to make the choice instead of being able to, just act. Another thing is to communicate constantly. So this is a major part of vendor management. Like I said previously, not as much of a big thing with larger vendors like Dell, IBM, Microsoft, but with, your local vendors, your more complex vendors, talk to them constantly, check in, make sure everything's good, make sure that, there's no interruptions on their end. And then finally, remain flexible. Just, things happen and you really can't control them sometimes. So that's why it's important to stay on top of things. It's important to be able to adapt to any given situation. So if the worst does happen, you're not paralyzed. You can actually jump in, make the changes, do what you need to do, and get on top of your vendors and make sure that they're delivering what they're supposed to be delivering, you're delivering what you're supposed to be delivering, and that way your bottom line isn't going to be impacted by any unforeseen problems or incidents. So with that said, feel free to ask me any questions in the chat. In the meantime, while you guys type those out, I do want to talk about some upcoming webinars we do have. So next week, we'll be doing the next part of our SharePoint Basics series, and that'll be on metadata. So we'll be exploring what that is, how to use it, get set up, do all that. After that, on April 20th, we'll be doing important customer data you should be tracking. So similarly to last week when we were talking about measuring employee performance, measuring customer data and what you can do to how to apply that to your organization and be more adaptable. After that, on April 27th, we'll be taking a look at a basic guide to OCR contract management tools. So what those are, how they work, how they benefit your organization, and figuring out whether or not you should be using them with yours. And then finally, on May 4th, we'll be doing how Office 365 can help you avoid common sales problems. So tools that you can use within Office 365 to overcome pretty common sales issues. So I don't see any questions. So I think we're just going to finish things out right now. Feel free to contact us. You can call us at 309-9970, or you can reach out to us at info@mydoc365.com, or if you have any questions related to vendor management, Office 365, feel free to reach out to me at qrussell@mydoc365.com, and then make sure to follow us on LinkedIn at doc365.com. Not .com, just Doc365. This has been Quentin Russell with Doc365, and I hope you will have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much, and goodbye.